The morning fog of September 19th, 1944 hung low over the damp fields of Arracourt, eastern France. The air barely moved. A pale strip of light pressed against the horizon, but the ground remained swallowed in a thick gray curtain. Beneath that stillness, two forces were about to collide in a way neither side had anticipated. For weeks, General George S. Patton's Third Army had pushed the Germans back, threatening the approaches to Metz. To halt the advance, the German High Command sent forward Panther tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade, newly issued, fresh from the factory, and believed to be the last armored strength capable of stopping the Americans. At dawn, their engines growled through the mist, deep, heavy, confident. The men inside those tanks trusted the steel around them, thick frontal armor, long-range firepower, and the belief that American armored vehicles could never match a Panther in a straight fight. But within minutes, that confidence shattered. From somewhere inside the fog came a sound none of them recognized. A sharp, high-pitched whine, cutting through the air like an aircraft engine descending too low. Low silhouettes flickered between the curtains of mist, appearing and vanishing as if the ground itself opened to swallow them. A single flash, then another. In less than 20 seconds, 3 Panthers were burning. German crews tried to traverse their turrets, but the enemy had already disappeared into the haze before the barrels could even reach the firing angle. No one on the German side could describe what had hit them. They only knew one thing. Whatever it was, it moved far faster than any armored vehicle they had ever faced. That morning, the Germans encountered a brutal truth. The Americans had unleashed a tank destroyer capable of reaching 55 miles per hour. A machine so light it bordered on fragile, yet so fast it broke every assumption German doctrine relied upon. And as those Hellcats vanished once more into the fog of Lorraine, the Battle of Arracourt was no longer just a clash of armor. It became a test of imagination, and a test the Germans were not prepared to take. The morning of September 20th, 1944 arrived without fog. Instead, a pale, brittle light dragged itself across the battered terrain of Lorraine. The ground was torn into jagged shapes, deep ruts carved by retreating Panthers, scorched craters still smoking from artillery strikes, and the charred silhouettes of tanks burned down to black skeletons. The air tasted of metal and dust. For the Germans of the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, daybreak brought no renewal, only the realization that they were entering the final stage of a battle they no longer controlled. Their officers tried to reorganize what remained of their armor, but the truth was undeniable. Their formations were shattered, their crews exhausted, their radios unreliable, and their sense of direction slipping away. The only thing moving with purpose across the battlefield was the M18 Hellcat. What the German brigades had believed would be a decisive counteroffensive now felt like a slow dissolution, a military formation unraveling in broad daylight. A German officer wrote in his field report, "We attacked with hope. We continued with uncertainty. We ended with confusion." Those final days had begun. The German counterattack in Lorraine had always been fragile. The final days exposed every weakness. 1. Crews with only weeks of training. Many Panther drivers and gunners were barely out of training school. They had little gunnery experience, no coordination under fire, and minimal practice in low visibility conditions. 2. Tanks fresh from the factory. The Panthers were new but untested and prone to mechanical failure. Several broke down simply moving into position. 3. Fuel shortages everywhere. Panthers consumed massive amounts of fuel. German supply lines were overstretched, bombed, and disrupted. Many tanks entered the battlefield with half-filled tanks, hoping to refill after the attack. They never got the chance. 4. No synchronized infantry support. The panzer brigades moved too fast for their infantry, who lagged behind on foot. Without infantry screening them, the Panthers were isolated and exposed, perfect prey for a fast predator. A German staff officer wrote bitterly, "We drove into the fog as if into a dream. By the time we realized it was a nightmare, we could not wake." Arracourt was transforming from a tactical failure into a catastrophe. The Americans understood the terrain intimately by the second day. Every ridge, every slope, every shallow dip became part of a deliberate trap. Hellcats used high ground not to dominate by firepower, but to dominate by geometry. From the ridge lines they could see the angles of German advance, the weaknesses in Panther arcs of fire, the paths German units were likely to take. From these vantage points, Hellcats fired into the flanks of advancing tanks, the rears of withdrawing ones, and the tops of vehicles cresting ridgelines. One U.S. officer described it, "The land rolled like waves. We sat on the crests and let the enemy drown themselves in the troughs." German tankers advancing up gentle slopes found themselves exposed like silhouettes in a shooting gallery. Their height, once an advantage, became a death sentence. 4.4. When the Germans tried to adapt, but found the battlefield working against them. Realizing their initial approach had failed, German commanders attempted new strategies. 1. Spread out to avoid flanking fire. But this thinned their formation, reducing mutual support. 2. Slow the advance to identify Hellcat positions. But slower tanks were easier targets. 3. Converge fire on suspected ridgeline positions. But Hellcats never fired twice from the same place. 4th attempt to flank the Americans. But Hellcats simply outran the flanking maneuver. A Panther crewman summarized the futility. "We were always turning. They were always moving." Every adaptation Germany attempted only deepened their losses. One of the most astonishing episodes of the final days occurred when 2 Hellcats of Company C executed a maneuver that defied every instinct of armored warfare. They crossed directly in front of a line of 6 Panthers. To a traditional tanker, this was madness. To a Hellcat crewman, it was opportunity. At high speed, they dashed across the Panthers' front arcs. The German turrets, heavy, slow, could not follow in time. By the time the Panthers tried to track them, the Hellcats were already behind them, firing into their side armor and cutting off their retreat. The maneuver shattered the entire German formation. American reports described it like a planned tactic. German survivors described it more like witnessing sorcery. "They crossed our guns as if they were made of paper." Panther commander post-war interview. This moment broke what remained of German confidence. Once German formations fragmented, the battlefield changed rhythm. No longer a clash of lines, it became a series of rapid, deadly duels. Hellcats circling behind stalled Panthers, flanking vehicles trapped near marshes, striking from ridges, appearing from behind hedgerows, coordinating crossfires. Panthers forced into individual fights were at a severe disadvantage. Their guns too slow to traverse, their armor irrelevant when struck from the side, their vision obscured, their infantry absent. An American Hellcat commander described it brutally. "We were not fighting tanks. We were harvesting them." The final day was not a battle, it was a purge. By late afternoon, something eerie settled over the ridgelines of Lorraine. The frantic clatter of tracks, whine of engines, thunder of guns, and shouts of commands. All began to fade. What replaced them was a kind of silence that did not belong on a battlefield. Not peace, not calm, but defeat. Smoke drifted over the fields. Black columns marked the locations of gutted Panthers. German tanks retreated in disorganized lines, many without orders. For American crews, the silence meant the cost of months of training had been justified. For German crews, the silence meant something else. The counter-offensive was dead. Arracourt was just the beginning. 2 months later, during the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcats from the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions held the vital crossroads of Nouville against overwhelming German pressure. Only 4 Hellcats took part, but the fog was back. Dense, featureless, oppressive, just like Lorraine. And once again, German tankers could not understand how many enemy vehicles they were fighting. They believed a battalion or a company or at least a dozen vehicles. In reality, it was 4. Those 4 Hellcats destroyed 24 German tanks, delaying the advance long enough for American paratroopers to secure Bastogne. One German officer wrote afterward, "I am still not convinced we faced only 4. In 2 different battles, fog became the Hellcat's cloak and speed its blade. After the war ended, the U.S. Army disbanded the entire tank destroyer force. Why? 1. The Germans never again fielded mass-armored breakthroughs. The tank destroyer mission vanished with German blitzkrieg. 2. Post-war combat favored heavier armor. Urban environments and close terrain reduced the Hellcat's advantages. 3. Guided munitions and air power changed anti-armor warfare entirely. 4. The Hellcat's thin armor was seen as too risky for future conflicts. The M18 had proven itself with overwhelming success, but it was a weapon for a specific moment, a razor designed for a single kind of war. Once that war ended, the doctrine behind it faded. Though its doctrine died, its philosophy lived on. Nations across the world began embracing what the Hellcat had demonstrated. Mobility can substitute for armor. This idea influenced PT-76 amphibious tank, USSR, BMP infantry fighting vehicle series, CVRT reconnaissance vehicles, UK, AMX-13 light tank, France. Leopard 1 main battle tank, Germany. These vehicles embraced speed maneuver, lighter armor, rapid repositioning. The Hellcat had shown that mobility was a form of survivability. Its legacy runs through modern armored doctrine. Get there first, move faster. Strike from angles the enemy cannot counter. For the Americans, Arracourt engraved 3 truths. 1. Speed is psychological. A fast enemy is terrifying. A fast ally is empowering. 2. Light vehicles can defeat heavy armor with the right tactics. 3. Crew discipline matters more than steel. For the Germans, Arracourt exposed the limits of their doctrine. 1. Firepower without mobility means nothing. 2. Armor without situational awareness is a trap. 3. A doctrine built for 1940 fails in 1944. A German commander later admitted, "The Americans did not beat our tanks. They beat our thinking." The story of the M18 Hellcat is not simply that it was fast. It is what that speed allowed. Unpredictability, initiative, angles of attack no enemy expected, survival under conditions where armor offered nothing. No other nation dared build a combat vehicle with armor so thin and mobility so extreme. But the gamble paid off. In Arracourt, a few dozen Hellcats crippled 2 German Panzer brigades. In Novel, 4 Hellcats created the illusion of an entire battalion. Time and again, speed became deadlier than armor. A Hellcat veteran once summarized it. "We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we were faster, in our minds and in our machines." Looking back on the fields of Arracourt, one truth remains unshakable. Hellcats did not defeat Panthers by matching them. They defeated Panthers by refusing to fight on their terms. They turned every strength of the German tank into a weakness. Heavy armor equals slow traverse. Long gun equals slow aim. Strong optics equals useless in fog. Disciplined formations equals vulnerable to flanking. Powerful engine equals poor agility in tight terrain. The M18 turned the battlefield into a stage of speed-based warfare, and the Germans, trained for deliberate, precise engagements, could not adapt fast enough. Hellcat crews live by 3 rules: shoot fast, move fast, think fast. If all 3 were followed, they went home. If even one failed, they died. In Lorraine, those rules rewrote the mathematics of armored combat. The M18 Hellcat did not just run at 55 miles per hour. It ran past an entire doctrine of warfare, leaving the once mighty Panther brigades burning in its wake. As the sun struggled through the morning haze over Arracourt, the visibility improved just enough for both sides to understand the scale of what had begun. The fog did not lift. It stretched, thinned, curled along the low ridges like a pale serpent. Through those drifting curtains, shadows shifted, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes fading into nothing. For the Germans, this partial clarity brought no comfort. What they saw or failed to see confirmed their worst fears. They were not facing a battalion of heavy tanks. They were facing something faster, lower, and infinitely more elusive. The first minutes of shock were over. The next phase was about survival. And from here on, every foot of Lorraine would turn into a battleground where seconds mattered more than armor. For the Americans of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the thinning fog was an opportunity. They could finally confirm enemy movement, identify Panther silhouettes, coordinate overlapping fields of fire, and switch from blind ambush to guided engagement. In the fog's early hours, Hellcats struck like ghosts. Now they struck with direction. The turning point had arrived. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, commanding one of the forward Hellcat platoons, had no illusions about the risks. Each Hellcat under his control had paper-thin armor, an open-top turret, a crew exposed to artillery, mortars, and small arms fire, and a gun that could only win by striking the right angle. Yet the platoon was placed in a key position, a gentle, curved rise overlooking a shallow basin where German armor had to pass. Leiper studied the movement of the mist and the silhouettes below. The Panthers were too close together. They were angled wrong for their long guns. Their turrets were traversing too slowly to cover the flanks. He recognized the moment. He issued a simple command: fire, fast, relocate. His platoon obeyed with near-surgical precision. Within the next 30 minutes, Leiper's men would destroy 15 German tanks, a feat unmatched by any U.S. tank destroyer platoon on the Western Front. For the Germans, this was the first unmistakable sign that something far worse than a defensive skirmish was unfolding. These were not random shots from scattered U.S. vehicles. This was a coordinated killing pattern, fast, disciplined, practiced. One German report stated, "Enemy fire striking from multiple angles, positions impossible to identify, vehicles changing direction at high speed." The longer the battle continued, the clearer it became. Hellcats weren't just hitting them. Hellcats were studying them, reading their formations like open pages. On the left flank of Leiper's line, Sergeant Henry R. Hartman maneuvered his Hellcat with an audacity that bordered on reckless. The terrain there dropped into a concave depression, offering only momentary glimpses of the German attack. Hartman used this dip like a moving shield, driving up just enough to expose the turret, firing fast, then sliding back down before the Panthers could respond. His gunner fired with machine-like rhythm: acquire, fire, drop, relocate, reappear, fire again. In a span of minutes, not hours, not a prolonged fight, Hartman's Hellcat destroyed 6 Panthers. One after-action U.S. report described it coldly: gun crew displayed exceptional reflex timing. All kills achieved from shifting elevations, enemy unable to traverse turrets. German survivors were less restrained. We fired where he had been, never where he was. Hartman's movement created the illusion of multiple vehicles. Some German crews believed they were being attacked by an entire company of tank destroyers. In reality, they were being hunted by one. The turning point tightened. The Germans had entered Lorraine with a plan grounded in doctrine. Panthers advance in tight formation. Enemy armor is pushed back with concentrated long-range fire. Infantry follows to secure ground. Artillery supports the breakthrough. But doctrine required clear fields of view, and fast turret responses, and stable lines of communication. In Lorraine, they had none of these. Failure 1. Formations broke within minutes. Hellcat fire from multiple angles forced Panthers to scatter. Failure 2. Long-range firepower became irrelevant. Visibility never reached the 1,500 to 2,000 meters Panther gunners needed. Failure 3. Turret traverse speeds were too slow. Panther crews simply couldn't acquire fast-moving targets. Failure 4. Infantry lagged behind. The German infantry escort struggled to keep pace with the armored push. Without infantry to shield them, Panthers became exposed steel giants. A German officer later summarized the disaster: "We fought the battle we had trained for. They fought the battle we were in." The American tank destroyer doctrine was built on 3 fundamentals. 1. Fire quickly from a concealed position. Hellcats fired 3 to 5 rounds within seconds. 2. Relocate immediately. Never stay more than 60 seconds. Often crews moved in under 15. 3rd, attack from unexpected angles. By shifting and rolling terrain, Hellcats created overlapping attacks. This doctrine, theorized long before the battle, had never been tested on this scale, but at Arracourt it came alive in devastating fashion. The Hellcat's speed allowed them to flank, misdirect, appear on ridges, fire from dips, attack into fog, retreat before Panthers could respond. The battlefield became a 3-dimensional chessboard where movement mattered more than armor. The Germans, trained for slow, deliberate gunnery, were trapped in the wrong war. By mid-morning, German officers attempted to salvage the attack by ordering 3 tactical changes. 1. Push Panthers into extended line formation. Goal: reduce vulnerability to flanking. Result: increased vulnerability to multiple Hellcat platoons. 2. Advance cautiously instead of aggressively. Goal: spot the Hellcats. Result: slow-moving Panthers became stationary targets. 3. Focus on covering likely withdrawal routes. Goal: catch Hellcats during movement. Result: Hellcats moved faster than Panthers could track. The Germans were trying to adjust a doctrine built for open fields, long-range fights, clear skies, predictable enemy movements. Arracourt offered none of these. As visibility improved, American forward observers, hidden in tree lines, drainage ditches, and shattered farmhouses, began directing artillery fire with chilling accuracy. The 37th Field Artillery Battalion fired coordinated missions that landed between Panther formations, across withdrawal routes into staging areas, and around any hill where German tanks attempted to regroup. German artillery, hindered by lack of visibility and communication breakdowns, could not provide equivalent support. The fog, once an equalizer, now favored the side with better coordination, the Americans. Panthers found themselves forced to maneuver under indirect fire, while Hellcats waited motionless, engines idling low, ready to strike when the Germans broke cover. The turning point deepened. A critical but often overlooked element of the Arracourt fight was the role of U.S. reconnaissance. Jeep crews, armed with only radios and light arms, moved rapidly along the flanks, reporting German movement, Panther concentrations, choke points, suspected artillery positions, and gaps in the German advance. These recon teams transformed Hellcats into precision strike weapons. Every time the Germans shifted direction, a recon jeep was already watching. Every time a Panther attempted to reposition, a Hellcat platoon had already started moving to intercept. The Germans felt hunted, not because they saw the Hellcats, but because they could not avoid them. Around 11 a.m., the fog began to burn away. Beams of light pierced through the mist, revealing the charred hulks of destroyed Panthers and the dark smoke drifting skyward from their burning engine compartments. What had been a phantom battlefield in the early morning now became a real landscape of steel and fire. With increased visibility, Hellcats gained better firing lanes, recon units provided clearer sightings, artillery gained maximum effect, and Panthers lost their only natural cover. Hellcats began coordinating long-range fire, hitting Panthers before they crested ridgelines. At this moment, the Americans shifted from defensive operations to aggressive control. The turning point was complete. German tank crews trained to dominate found themselves trapped in a battle they could not influence. They could not track the Hellcats, predict their movements, call for accurate artillery, coordinate across broken radio nets, maintain formation, or identify where the next strike would come from. Some crews bailed from tanks that weren't even hit yet, their nerves broken by the relentless rhythm of sudden ambushes. One German crewman wrote after the war, "We saw our comrades burning, but never the enemy who killed them. Fear spread faster than orders. Panic broke faster than cohesion. By early afternoon, the German advance had ground to a halt. Orders were issued to withdraw, regroup, and reattempt the attack from a different axis. The retreat was disorganized. Some Panthers reversed blindly. Some drove into marshy ground. Others collided with burning wrecks. Some became stuck in drainage ditches. Hellcats did not pursue recklessly. They advanced methodically, taking ridges, securing firing positions, and hitting German armor as it attempted to escape. For the first time all day, the Americans understood fully. The turning point was not a moment. It was a process, and it was now complete. By the end of September 19th, confirmed casualties were German losses: 39 tanks destroyed, 11 damaged, significant infantry casualties, loss of command cohesion. American losses: 3 to 4 Hellcats, minor infantry losses, minimal disruption to overall strength. The kill ratio was astonishing. Even more astonishing was how quickly it had happened. German officers filed bewildered reports, enemy fire pattern unpredictable. Turret traverse insufficient to track targets. Speed of enemy vehicles exceeds capability of current doctrine. These reports marked the moment German command realized they were facing a new kind of armored warfare, one they had no counter for. The effects rippled outward. 1. Metz became indefensible. The Panther brigades meant to anchor its defense were crippled. 2. Patton's Third Army regained momentum. Nothing could stop the push toward the Moselle. Third German High Command reevaluated all assumptions of American armored capability. For years, the German belief had been, Americans relied on numbers. Americans lacked tank versus tank skill. American armor was inferior in quality. Arracourt reversed that thinking. The Americans had not won by numbers. They had won by speed, technique, and innovation. As night fell and smoke drifted across the battlefield, the remaining Hellcats gathered in defensive positions. Their crews were silent, exhausted and wary. They knew the Germans would come again. They knew the day's success had been razor thin, resting on timing, terrain, and nerve. But for the first time since dawn, they allowed themselves a moment of realization. They had turned the tide. Not with armor, not with overwhelming firepower, but with mobility, precision, and discipline. Arracourt was not just a victory, it was the moment the M18 Hellcat proved what it truly was, a predator in a battlefield designed for prey. If the opening phase of Arracourt was a shock, then what followed was a descent into something far darker. For both sides, the battlefield became a place where life and death were decided in seconds. But for the Germans, the seconds always belonged to someone else. As the fog thickened again between mid-morning gusts of wind, the fields of Lorraine felt suffocating, heavy with the smell of burning fuel, scorched rubber, hot steel, and churned earth. Every few moments, a delayed ammunition cook-off cracked in the distance. The hiss of ruptured hydraulics seeped from burning Panthers. Shouts echoed from crews scrambling out of crippled tanks, and the faint whine of radial engines drifted from somewhere unseen. To the Germans, it felt as if dozens of enemy vehicles were swarming around them. In truth, there were barely a dozen Hellcats in the sector, but their speed, rhythm of attack, and unpredictable angles made them seem infinite. A German tank commander wrote afterward, "We no longer fought on open ground. We fought in a maze the Americans controlled. Every turn was a trap." Lorraine had become the hell within. From the outside, the M18 seemed almost fragile. Thin armor, open turret, exposed crew. Inside, it was something else entirely. A cramped, vibrating, metal nerve center where 4 men survived by instinct, reflex, and discipline. The world of a Hellcat crew consisted of wind snapping across the open turret ring, the acrid sting of propellant from the 76mm gun, the recoil jolting the gunner's shoulder and rattling the turret platform, metal clattering as empty shell casings rolled against the floor, the distant thumps of German high-explosive rounds landing meters away. Hellcat survival required precision under terror. The driver had to accelerate and brake hard without upsetting the gun's aim. The gunner had to fire quickly, knowing each second he stayed exposed multiplied the chance of death. The commander had to stand tall, torso fully exposed, scanning a battlefield filled with fire and steel. One Hellcat veteran later said, "If you hesitated, you died. If you moved too slowly, you died. If you moved too fast at the wrong moment, you also died." Hellcat crews didn't have armor to hide behind. Their only protection was motion. Lorraine's rolling ground was deceptive. To an untrained eye, it looked like shallow farmland. To a Hellcat crew, it was a map of survival. Gentle ridges, old farm berms, half-collapsed field boundaries, shallow ditches, 2-meter rises that shielded an entire vehicle. A Panther's height exposed it above nearly everything. A Hellcat's low profile allowed it to vanish behind even minor elevation changes. A Hellcat could creep up a ridge, expose only its gun and mantler, fire twice, reverse a few meters, pivot behind the next rise, and reappear 150 meters to the right. All before a Panther completed more than 15 degrees of turret rotation. A German gunner recalled, "We saw the flash of their gun, then nothing. By the time we turned the turret, they were somewhere else entirely." The landscape became part of the Hellcat's anatomy. Every ripple of earth was a lung, a shield, a blade. No sound in the Battle of Arracourt terrified German tankers more than the high metallic scream of the Wright R975 radial engine. It was nothing like the deep growl of a tank engine. It was sharp, rising, almost airborne. A Panther crewman described it as a shriek from the fog, like a Stuka diving but on the ground. The moment they heard it, German crews knew. They were already being hunted. The enemy was moving fast, an attack would come from an unknown angle, and their gun would not traverse in time. Hellcat crews often cut their engines, coasting silently into firing positions. Then as they accelerated away, the radial engine scream echoed behind them, leaving German gunners spinning their turrets toward a place where the Hellcat had been, not where it was. The sound became a psychological weapon. On paper, Panther tanks dominated every metric 75 mm L/70 high-velocity gun, thick-sloped frontal armor, excellent optics, long-range accuracy. But in Arracourt, none of these advantages mattered. Panthers needed long sight lines. Fog and terrain denied them. Panthers needed time to aim. Hellcats denied them. Panthers needed turret traverse speed. Physics denied them. Panthers needed infantry support. The battlefield denied them. The 76 mm gun of the Hellcat was not superior. It was merely fast enough to hit first, and Hellcat movement was fast enough to avoid the return fire entirely. A U.S. veteran put it bluntly, "We never fought a fair fight." That was the point. As Panther formations broke apart, German infantry suffered even more. They found themselves unable to see targets, unable to predict Hellcat positions, unable to close distance to use Panzerfaust, unable to keep pace with armor, unable to communicate effectively. Hellcats chose engagement ranges of 400 to 600 meters, far beyond infantry anti-tank weapons. German infantry often found themselves fighting an invisible foe. A German infantryman's diary read, "We saw our tanks burning, but we never saw who killed them. The hell within consumed not only armor, but also the morale of the men who walked behind it." By late morning, the Hellcats had accomplished something almost unheard of in armored warfare. They controlled the tempo. Tempo meant attacking when the Germans slowed, retreating when they advanced, flanking when they reformed, striking at angles that turned armor thickness irrelevant, choosing every engagement on their own terms. What began as a fog-bound ambush evolved into a continuous, fluid battle, where Hellcats dictated when the Germans fired, when they maneuvered, when they retreated. A German officer admitted, "They did not fight us. They manipulated us." Around noon, the fog finally began to burn away. What it revealed was a panorama of destruction, multiple Panthers burning shattered Panzer IVs, abandoned Stu G3 assault guns, thick columns of oily smoke swirling upward. With visibility restored, Hellcats became even deadlier. They began engaging Panthers from extended ranges, setting up crossfires on open slopes, circling around crippled German vehicles, cutting off withdrawal routes. German tankers who survived the morning now found themselves exposed under bright daylight, with no fog to hide their silhouettes. And the Hellcats no longer needed the fog. They had the speed. In a desperate attempt to salvage the battle, German command deployed Panzer IV medium tanks, Stu G3 assault guns, and scattered armored support vehicles. But these reinforcements only deepened the disaster. Panzer IVs could not withstand 76mm fire even from the front at close to medium ranges. Stug 3 had no turret. They could not react to fast-moving Hellcats attacking from oblique angles. Support vehicles lacked armor and became immediate targets. Within an hour, these reinforcements were burning wrecks. A surviving German commander wrote, "We brought knives to a gunfight, but their gun moved faster than our knives." Between 12 and 1600, Arracourt became a graveyard of steel. Hellcats moved in synchronized packs, one firing, one relocating, one flanking, one overwatching. They created a perpetual cycle of pressure. German units tried to regroup but were shattered by artillery, flanking fire, or rapid Hellcat strikes. By 1600, the 113th Panzer Brigade had lost cohesion. Command structure was fractured. Radio networks were broken. Vehicles were either burning or retreating without orders. The hell within had taken everything. Post-war interviews reveal the psychological impact. We were not defeated by numbers. We were defeated by speed. It felt like the Americans were everywhere. Our turrets were too slow. Our minds too slow. We learned fear. We learned helplessness. Hellcat crews echoed similar sentiments, but with grim clarity. We knew we lived by 3 rules: shoot fast, move fast, think fast. Fail any one of them, you die. When the final shots faded and the smell of burning oil drifted across the ridges, night approached. A cold wind swept over Lorraine. Smoke curled gently from the wrecks of Panthers. German infantry retreated into the tree lines. Hellcat crews dismounted, their faces blackened with soot, their hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Arracourt's fields, barely 10 hours earlier, a place of quiet fog, had become a landscape torn apart by velocity, fire, and steel. The hell within closed at last, but its lessons would echo far beyond Lorraine. The morning of September 19, 1944, opened under a dim, washed-out light across the rolling farmland of Lorraine. For days, rain had soaked the hills and low fields. Water pooled inside abandoned trenches. The earth smelled of wet wheat, churned mud, and diesel fumes lingering from the previous nights of movement. A cold mist lay across the terrain like a suffocating blanket, thick enough to blur silhouettes, but thin enough to reveal shadows of something moving beneath. Into that gray shroud, The tanks of the German 113th Panzer Brigade pushed forward. Their mission was blunt: break Patton's advance, retake the area around Arracourt, and keep Metz from falling. The brigade had been formed in haste. Many of its crews were young men with only weeks of training. Their Panthers were factory fresh, their paint barely worn. Yet morale was high. German doctrine had taught them that. Their armor was superior, their gun was unrivaled. American tanks could not stand at long range, and a Panther could dominate any battlefield if employed properly. Most of these men believed they were entering a conventional armored clash, one they would win by virtue of steel and firepower. But the Americans lying silent in the low folds of the terrain were not conventional opponents. Their vehicles were not built for slugging matches. Their crews were not trained for slow, deliberate engagements. They were trained for something entirely different. And as the fog tightened its grip on the battlefield, the Germans were moving into a kill box perfectly suited to the fastest tracked combat vehicle of the entire war. To understand why the Hellcat appeared at this exact moment, we must rewind to the turbulent years 1939 to 1941, when Germany's blitzkrieg shattered much of Europe in a matter of months. The speed of the German advance stunned the U.S. War Department. Poland collapsed in 35 days. France, once considered the strongest army in the world, fell in 6 weeks. The myth of static fortifications died overnight. Among the American officers forced to rethink everything was Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, a former cavalryman from Texas. He studied blitzkrieg not as a series of battles, but as a philosophy rooted in speed, momentum, concentration, and constant pressure. Bruce asked a question few dared ask: why build tanks to fight German tanks head-on? Matching the Wehrmacht gun for gun and armor for armor would take years the U.S. didn't have. But building a force designed to hunt German tanks, using maneuver instead of armor, was achievable. From this idea came the Tank Destroyer Command and its radical creed: seek, strike, destroy. American tank destroyers would not fight like tanks. They would fight like mechanized cavalry, appearing suddenly, attacking quickly, and disappearing before the enemy could respond. From this doctrine, the fundamental philosophy of the M18 Hellcat was born. Speed is armor. Mobility is survival. Agility is lethality. It would take 2 years of experimentation, false starts, and engineering battles before that philosophy took physical form. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, speed became a national priority. The Ordnance Department demanded a vehicle that could reach extraordinary velocity, wield a 76mm gun, remain lightweight, traverse rough terrain with ease, and be mass-produced by American industry. The specifications shifted constantly. Designers wrestled with gun calibers, suspension types, hull configurations, and engine choices. The breakthrough came when Buick proposed a torsion bar suspension with long travel for high-speed stability, an air-cooled Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, and the Torque-Matic automatic transmission, something unheard of in armored design. In April 1943, the prototype T-70 roared across the test field at speeds that stunned observers: 55 miles per hour, 88.5 kilometers per hour. For a tracked vehicle in 1943, this was impossible. Yet there it was, slicing across the proving ground with a howl more akin to a dive bomber than a tank. The Army accepted the design almost immediately. The T-70 became the M18 Hellcat, and production began at breakneck speed. Throughout 1943 to 1944, Scattered German reports mentioned a fast American tank destroyer, but their analysts dismissed the claims outright. The Wehrmacht's armored doctrine was built on these assumptions. Tank destroyers must be heavily armored, weight equals survival, survivability equals firepower. Fast vehicles sacrifice stability and accuracy. The idea that the Americans would willingly send a machine into combat with 25 millimeters maximum armor, 13 millimeter side armor, an open-top turret, and crew protection thinner than many trucks was utterly absurd to them. A German intelligence summary from June 1944 concluded, reports of enemy tank destroyers reaching 70 to 80 kilometers per hour are exaggerated or caused by combat stress. The Germans would discover how wrong they were only months later, in the fog of Lorraine. During early September 1944, Combat Command A of the U.S. 4th Armored Division moved into the Arracourt region, supported by the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. They entrenched themselves behind undulating ridgelines, among low fields and hedgerows. Hellcat crews worked through the night to prepare, digging shallow hull-down positions, trimming bushes to create firing lanes, marking fallback points, memorizing terrain features invisible under fog, coordinating with reconnaissance jeeps and Sherman tanks. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, one of the platoon leaders, noted, everything depended on firing first and relocating fast. Standing still meant death within seconds. American crews knew Panthers were superior at long range, but they also knew Panthers were slow to traverse, mechanically fragile, tall targets easily exposed on lateral slopes, and extremely vulnerable at the sides. The battlefield itself favored the Hellcat. The Germans simply didn't know it. On the night of September 18th, cold air rolled in from the east. Moisture clung to the fields. By dawn, a heavy fog, one of the thickest that month, blanketed the entire area. For the Germans, the fog offered what they believed was a tactical gift: concealment for their advance, protection from American artillery observers, and the chance to close the distance quickly. For the Americans, it offered something else entirely: cover for movement, a way to mask withdrawal routes, a perfect stage for speed-based ambushes, and the opportunity to strike from multiple angles undetected. No side knew it yet, but the fog would become the central character of the coming battle. At 06:15, as the Panthers rolled forward, they unknowingly crossed into overlapping kill zones plotted by the 704th. The Hellcats held fire as the German column advanced deeper, waiting for the exact moment when turret rotation would be slowest and visibility poorest. At ranges of 400 to 800 meters, Leiper gave the order. The first volley ripped through the fog, 2, then 3, then 4 shots from different angles. Panthers burst into flame within seconds. German crews reported no clear muzzle flashes, no silhouettes, only the howl of a radial engine fading into the mist. It was the beginning of a pattern the Germans could not decipher. Turret rotation, often ignored in popular accounts, was one of the most decisive factors of the entire battle. Panther traverse speed, 6 degrees per second at idle, up to 19 degrees per second at high engine RPM. 60 seconds for a full rotation under typical battlefield conditions. Hellcat turret traverse of 15 degrees per second, consistent, independent of engine RPM, 24 seconds for a full rotation. The Hellcat could fire 3 to 5 rounds, reverse at 30 plus miles per hour, reposition 200 meters, and reappear at a new angle, all before a Panther turret completed a fraction of its turn. This mismatch sealed the fate of the German crews. Lorraine's countryside was not flat. It was a series of gentle rises and dips, natural wave patterns across the ground. A Panther cresting such a rise exposed nearly its entire hull. A Hellcat needed to expose only the gun, the mantelet, and a sliver of turret armor. The terrain allowed Hellcats to fire from hull-down positions, retreat by rolling backward into low ground, use gravity to relocate silently, traverse behind ridge lines completely hidden. This made it nearly impossible for German crews to determine the Hellcat's position, direction of movement, or even the number of vehicles attacking. To them, it felt like fighting a dozen phantoms. 3 major problems crippled the Germans. 1. Inexperienced crews. Many had never faced enemy armor in real battle conditions. 2. Radio breakdown and jamming. Reports describe broken communication nets, interference from U.S. jamming, incompatible channels between units, crews operating independently without coordination. 3. Zero situational awareness. They did not know what type of vehicle hit them, how many there were, from which direction they came, or how fast they could move. One after-action report reads, "Enemy vehicles appeared and vanished before guns could traverse. Impossible to identify type due to extreme mobility." This blindness destroyed German cohesion. The U.S. Tank Destroyer Center at Camp Hood had produced crews tailored for high-speed operations, split-second decision-making, decentralized command, and coordinated movement in small units. Hellcat drivers. Train 2. Accelerate harder, brake sharply, pivot under pressure, maintain stability over rough terrain. Hellcat gunners. Trained to fire quickly, accept lower first shot accuracy, prioritize volume and speed over precision. Hellcat commanders. Trained to think 3 positions ahead, plan fallback points, read terrain instantly, lead from the open turret regardless of incoming fire. In Arracourt, this training transformed the battlefield. Each Hellcat became a self-contained predator. By late morning, the results were catastrophic for the 113th Panzer Brigade. 39 tanks destroyed, 11 damaged, U.S. losses, 3 to 4 Hellcats. The kill ratio was unprecedented. German officers reported, targets moved too quickly to track. Turrets could not rotate fast enough. Enemy vehicles vanished into terrain before fire could be returned. Arracourt had become the largest defeat of Panthers at the hands of American forces in the Western Front. The ramifications of Arracourt extended far beyond the battlefield. 1. Germany lost 2 newly built Panzer brigades. These units never regained their strength. 2. Metz, the fortress city, became indefensible. Patton's forces advanced without facing another armored counterstrike of similar scale. 3. German commanders re-evaluated American mobility. Many realized too late that speed could be a form of protection. 4. The tank destroyer doctrine was vindicated. Arracourt became textbook validation of the American concept of speed-based anti-armor warfare. Ironically, the Hellcat's thin armor, its greatest vulnerability, was the key to its success. Because of minimal armor, it was light, it was fast, it accelerated instantly, it consumed less fuel, it could be produced cheaply and quickly. A Panther cost more than 117,000 Reichsmarks. A Hellcat cost $55,230. The war economy favored Hellcats. The Battle of Arracourt was more than a tactical clash. It was a collision between two doctrines, two philosophies of armored warfare, and two radically different interpretations of what it meant to survive battlefield chaos. The Germans brought armor, firepower, and tradition. The Americans brought mobility, unpredictability, and innovation. And on the ridgelines of Lorraine, the old world met the new and broke apart. Arracourt was only the opening chapter. What followed, the full wrath of the Hellcat, the destruction of the German brigades, and the systematic collapse of the counterattack, would become the true story of how mobility rewrote the mathematics of war.